All right, so I'm on here with Kristyn Smith. Kristyn, thank you so much for joining me.
Happy to be here.
And I'm very happy to have you back on because you have walked me through courses in the past. I think you've walked me through Boston and you've walked me through New York, and you've always provided our community with really helpful tips. So now we're gonna tackle Chicago together.
Yes. Chicago's a great race, especially for, people that are American because it's really convenient. There's no crazy time differences, like I have a lot of people that run Berlin. It is almost the same flatness, but you have to deal with jet lag and the time difference and a lot of travel and all of that. So, this is a great race for that majors environment, but also a really fast course and incredible spectators. So it really combines a lot of the best of all things. And, it's also convenient for a lot of people to get to. So,
Yes, yes, that's one of the perks I personally find that you can just stay at the starting line, which is also the finish line. So you have that convenience of not having to be shuttled through different areas and all that.
yes, exactly. The Grant Park start and finish, everything's really convenient. There's thousands of hotels right there in the loop. That's that area right around Grant Park. And so, for anybody that's coming with you as well, it's a really great race for them to spectate and to have supporters because they can see you multiple times. So, logistics of this race are really fabulous.
Yes, absolutely. And the course is one that is very pleasant. As we know, this is the current world record course where Calvin Kipton had set I think it was 2 hours and 35-second record. Unfortunately, he passed. So now we're excited to see what other marathoners are gonna do, including John Career. What do you tell your clients about this course? How to approach this best? Maybe we can do a walkthrough.
Sure. So I break the course down. It is essentially three out and backs. You go north first, north to south first, then you go west to east, then you go south to north. And again, that's all sort of circling around the loop and Grant Park. So you'll go out and back in those three primary directions. The great thing about this course, aside from the fact that it is a lot of flat, wide avenues. You have four lanes across most of the course. But you're also, because you're changing direction so many times, there's no prolonged wind exposure. If you're a person who's done a point to point like a Boston or a New York, you could be running 26.2 miles into a headwind for the entire thing. And even though Chicago is called the Windy City, there, certainly could be some winds, but because you're changing directions with those three out and backs, you're really never into a headwind for any prolonged period of time. And then the same thing occurs with sun exposure. And we like we like to talk about sun exposure because of temperatures concerns as well, but also there's a perception of if you are in the sun, even if the temperature isn't that high, just sun hitting your skin can make you feel a lot warmer than you actually are. And so that's another great thing about this course. It starts really early in the morning, so the sun is going to be low in the sky for much of the race. The other thing is you're protected and shielded from tall buildings throughout all of that downtown area, which again you go to at three different points in the course going in those out and backs. And so there's a lot of shade, there's a lot of wind protection, there's a lot of great aspects to this to really have the best performance that you possibly can. And again, that I think that speaks to why the world record has been set on this course. The other thing too, in terms of race logistics, it's very flat. There are only a couple of points where you are doing those elevation changes, and those primarily can be summed up in crossing the river, Chicago River. So you do that at six different points in the race. And those account for the majority of the elevation changes. So the elevation total is 243 feet of gain. And again, that's That's a quarter of the size of a New York or a Boston, which have over 800 feet of elevation gain. So that gives you a little bit of perspective, right? This is quite flat. But those bridges, they're just little bumps. They're really nothing to, slow you down in any substantial way. They're not huge or long, miles long, like a Queensboro Bridge, which is over 2 miles long, right? So this is none of that. These are just little tiny elevation changes that give your muscles a chance to really exercise in a different way. And then the other major elevation change comes at the very end of the race. It actually comes at mile 26. And you'll hear people talk about this sort of in a joking way, but also in a serious way, purely because of where it falls. And that is, as I said, at mile 26. But we call it Mount Roosevelt. It's not a mountain. It's not really even that big at all, but it's because it is so late into the race, it has, a coupling effect with all of the fatigue from all of those miles that you've done before. But you'll hear people talk about this. Oh, the climb at the end. This is called Mount Roosevelt. So basically, there you're just taking it's an overpass, okay? And it's not long and it's not big or anything like that, but you're taking a overpass over some train tracks that are below. And so that can sort of slow you down, but it is really short. You're only going to be on it for a couple of minutes. And then once you crest that, it's downhill and you make a left to the finish line. So really, you can feel all of that energy and excitement and use that to get you over that quote unquote mount. Um, in terms of, like going through the course itself, I don't generally break it up in terms of landmarks or sites or anything like that because, again, there's not really a lot to distinguish it. That's no slight to Chicago, but it's a beautiful city. But, a skyscraper is a skyscraper, right? It's not like, oh, at this skyscraper, I'm going to do this. The course, because it is so flat and so uniform, it really benefits from a negative split strategy, and a very slight negative split strategy, um, because there's no real reason to make huge elevation changes. There's no or pace changes due to elevation changes. So whatever your pace is overall, your goal pace for the race, you're basically going to stick pretty close to that with some only small variations, maybe 5 or 10 seconds. And I just recommend everybody, this is just a overall marathoning tip, really, is that people start out conservatively, and that's why I say that negative split strategy. But on the slight side, so we're not trying to do like 5 minute negative split. We're really trying to do something more like a 1 minute negative split. The other reason that this course and this race lends itself to that is that those early miles, really the first 5K to 10K, is going to be quite crowded just because of the number of people all starting with you. And this race has grown substantially over the years. I first ran it in 2018, actually, and they had just over 40,000 people. This year, they've been growing every single year, but post-COVID especially. And so this year, they're going to have over 50,000 people. Now, I don't really think it's a problem because, again, these are huge, wide avenues with 4 lanes of roadway to use. However, it is certainly going to be more congested in those early miles. And that, again, is fine because a marathon is a very, very long race. And so you don't need to go out exactly at pace. If you're 10 seconds over on the first 5K or the first 10K, that's fine. You can use that energy later in the race. It's going to clear out. You are going to have a lot more room, and you're going to be able to coast easier without trying to fight through people or without trying to zig and zag around, right? So it's all about conservation of energy early on. Then once you cross that halfway point, then you can really start to use up anything that you have left.
Okay, wonderful. So we've talked about the negative splitting. And with that, what are your suggestions? You mentioned pacing not being off by more than 5 to 10 seconds. When you are pacing yourself in Chicago, though, I had this bump, and this is a pretty much well-known bump that you don't have good GPS reception at the start.
Yes, that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. So the skyscrapers that help you, that protect you from the elements, protect you from the sun and the wind and all of that, they do create all kinds of havoc with your watch and with tracking your data. So I recommend everybody manually split their watches if you, especially if you have like a Garmin or a Coros. These watches, and they even have free programs you can download with no additional cost that will help you track and adjust for any GPS changes. So I'm not sponsored by anybody, but I'll tell you the one that I use for my Garmin. It's called Race Screen, and you set it up to manually lap at all of the mile markers, or you can choose whatever. Do it at the 5Ks if you run in Ks. And you lap it there. It will adjust your watch and your splits to exactly what that mile marker is when you hit it, and it will tell you exactly what you were doing. So that is hugely beneficial. But if, say, you're running with something else, you can even run with just a basic Timex watch. You can run with your Apple Watch without any apps or anything like that. All you need is your elapsed time, what your elapsed goal time is, and like a pace band or something like that. As don't hit start whilst you're walking up to the starting line, but exactly when you're crossing the timing mats at the starting line, hit start on your watch, and then that tracking will, in that time, will match exactly to your chip time. So for instance, whatever your target time is, say you want to hit the 10K in 41 minutes. When you're crossing the 10K point on the course, you look at your watch and you say, does it say 41 minutes or does it say like 40 minutes, 35 seconds, right? So then you can know, okay, I'm ahead. Or you can know you're a little bit behind. And so, you can manually do all of these things without any special technology or anything like that. Even like on a big, it's certainly easier if you have like a round number. Like if you're targeting 3:30 and that's 8 minutes a mile, you can look at your watch and see like, okay, have 8 minutes gone by since the last time I was I was crossing a mile marker, right? That's a little bit easier, but Chicago does give you a pace band. Actually, it's a pace tattoo. It's a special Nike thing. I just find it interesting because I have tried to use it before, and it's a cool idea, but you have to make sure you put it on well. And if you don't put it on well, because it is a tattoo, it can be a little weird on your arm, or it can get a little messed up. But you can like I because I've been running for a while, I've done some, really old school, basic conventional things where like I literally just write what my overall time splits are on a little note card, and I quote unquote laminate it with packing tape, with clear packing tape, right? So you don't have to be fancy. You don't have to have a special pace band. You don't have to order anything or do a tattoo or any of that kind of stuff. But you can do it really, really basically. But absolutely, you want to know where you are on the course in relation to what your target time is, and know how far ahead or behind you are, because the GPS will be off. Actually, I was it's just funny because when I did run this race in 2018, this is the longest marathon I've ever tracked, because my GPS was insane. And this was a long time. So this is like old technology, right? But in 2018, I actually tracked 28 miles for for this course. My watch was doing crazy things. Like it was showing me I was running a 4 minute mile at some places, and like I mean, it was doing crazy, right? Because of the GPS. I did run the race again in 2023, and there were some smaller issues, but it wasn't anywhere near as crazy as the 5 years prior to that. But so things have improved, I think, with technology and what's available, but you should absolutely prepare to have GPS do weird things, because again, a lot of this race, you go to the center of Chicago itself, which is all tall skyscrapers, really dense urban landscape there.
Yes, yes, and I can attest to that because I too got an accidental PR running this race. I literally was trying to see if I could run sub 8 minute pace, and I kept pushing and pushing, and my watch was just telling me 8:05, 8:05. And so then I crossed the halfway mark at like I think it was 134, and I was like, oh, I'm in trouble. And then I had a huge positive split for that race. So somebody had mentioned it at the starting line. Some lady was telling her friend, oh, you should manually set the time or, manually lap every mile. And I didn't know what they meant, but I'm a quick learner after that race.
Yes. Yeah, I actually, so because I've done a number of international races and also due to the elevation changes on courses like New York City or Boston, but I um, track and time myself by the 5Ks. And so I always know in my head what my 5K target time is, 21 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever it is, 24 minutes. Um, and so every time I hit the 5K on course, I just hit the lap and it shows you exactly what it is. It's like 22:30 or whatever. And so for me, I like not having the stress of checking every single mile, so I prefer to space it out over the 5Ks, but the same principle exists, right? So whatever denomination you want to use, know what it is and cross-reference that to the course itself. But again, it's relatively simple. There's not a lot of elevation changes. Whatever your target is, that should be your target. So if it's 8 minutes a mile, go for 8 minutes a mile. If you're 8:03, you're fine. If you're 8:50 or 7:55, again, you're fine. Like just right around that, and you're gonna be you're gonna be right on target. But really resist the urge to go out too fast. That's the trap that a lot of people fall into. And it's easy to do that because the energy of this race is huge, right? Um, there's a lot of anticipation. You're going to be surrounded by people. The spectators, especially as I mentioned in that inner urban core there, the spectator support is going to be humongous. Like there are parts where you go out, you get further out on the course. The spectators do sort of dissipate a little bit, but right in the middle, you're going to feel like a rock star. So you have to fight the urge a little bit to take all of that energy and go crazy and run 5K PR, 10K, but so use that energy to keep you motivated and happy, but not to run too fast.
Perfect. Perfectly said. Thank you for that. And you also mentioned earlier we have three in and outs. And with that, I'm assuming, well, I mean, I've run it. I know there's a lot of turns. So what can you tell us about the tangents on the course?
Yeah, so the tangent line is marked. That's a blue line, and that is the shortest distance. That's the measured distance. In my experience, there's not really the opportunity to run on the tangent line because there's so many people. And so, if you can, great. But if there's also, you're in a pack and there's 1,000 people around you, I wouldn't spend energy pushing, I wouldn't get in a fight to run on the tangent line. But as you go along in those later miles, it does tend to space out a lot more. So, you may find yourself at mile 15, 16, and it really has cleared out a lot. And then you can run the tangent line without burning through energy and without getting into a fist fight trying to push your way onto it, right? In those early sections, you're probably not going to be able to. And for me, I don't think it's worth the energy burn to try to stay on it. The aid stations are plentiful, they're very long, but they're also to the sides of the course, right? So for me, in terms of energy usage and in terms of feeling good later in the race, I would rather hit every single aid station and make sure I'm well fueled, well hydrated, have all the electrolytes that I need. So I would rather be in a good position for all of those than try to concentrate on running 100% on the tangent line. Because that's where I feel like I will fall down and lose more energy as opposed to like, oh, I didn't cut that, I cut that turn zero point zero 0.02 over. Like I'd rather make up the distance and have have the energy from fueling and hydrating properly. But if you're in a position, let's say you're in a position where you can do all of the things, there's a blue line, it is painted clearly on the roadway, so you can just follow it. You know what? You turn your brain off and just follow that line if you have that option. Absolutely.
Awesome. All right. I like that tip because, it's always with all these runners out there, sometimes you don't even see the blue line, right?
Yeah.
So that's that. All
Yeah,
right. So
exactly. You may not know it's there.
yeah. All right. So as a coach, I'm going to ask you what tips, just in general, do you give your clients when it comes to fueling for the marathon, just strictly during the race?
Yes, so hopefully everybody has been training and practicing fueling because this is one of the most important things. You have to train your gut, you have to train your stomach the same way you have to train your legs, right? If you try giving your stomach something totally foreign and something totally new you've never done before, it's probably not going to go well. There's a chance maybe it'll be okay, but it's not a guarantee, right? So hopefully we've practiced all of these things. So know what works for you. The fuel on course is going to be Morton energy gels, and then they also have bananas. Those are all later in the race, the banana stations, and I really do personally. I'm a banana fan, so I like that. But if you're a person who has never used Morton before, do not use it for the first time on race day. Bring your own and use what you know works for you because these things are very specific. Um, and so, whatever you're used to, whatever you've done in training, this is a repeat of that. Hopefully, you've been fueling throughout your long runs and you know to fuel early and often. Really, I try to tell people every 30 to 40 minutes, depending on your pace. That could come, some people do it by miles. I don't like saying that because my 30 minutes maybe 3 miles and your 30 minutes maybe 2 miles or whatever the mileage is, but the pace difference makes a different equation. So really I like to do it by time because your body knows time. Your body is burning through a certain amount of calories based on how long you're out there and how fast you're running, right? So the more intense and the longer, the greater the carbohydrate needs are because that's your energy is just being burned through, right? And so hopefully you have, again, practiced all of this. You have an idea of what that formula is. There's a big trend to higher carb intake. There's a lot of studies, especially on the elite side, where they're really like they're pounding carbs. And I just point this out because I think it's interesting because when I was first getting into marathoning and running, this number has changed like threefold over the years. So like what I started with and what I learned and what I started doing is like irrelevant. Like, like if you said that, what I learned in the beginning, if you repeated that now, people will be like, what are you talking about? Because it's outdated. Um, but if you're not used to that higher carb intake, then you shouldn't make race day the first time that you do it, right? But certainly what they've learned is that we can tolerate more carbs than previously thought, and that is also quite beneficial because again, the idea is that the intensity, it's not an easy run intensity. It's a higher intensity than that, but it's sub-threshold. So it's in between that. And that requires a greater energy expenditure.
Okay, perfect. I love how you said that with the timing. That's how I've been training too, and I think you actually told me that, but perfect. So anyway, I have two more questions for you before we come to the end of this. The mental wall. what are your personal tips for when you are in a race like that where I love Chicago, it's fast, but it also gets a little bit mundane. The scenery starts looking the same, and then you're just out there running and you're getting tired. What do you tell yourself to break through that?
Yes. I'll tell you actually specifically with Chicago because there's an out and back where you're running out next to the people going back at the very very end. It is at exactly from mile 22 to mile 24. And that for me is those are like the hardest miles of any marathon ever, right? But like once you get close enough to the end, you're like, oh, I'm almost there. But that part is really tricky. And you have that visual there of seeing the people going back and you're going out and you're like, that's the marathon feels like forever at that point, right? So what I like to do is I just block them out. I'm like, I don't even see them. They're going to be on your left-hand side when you're going out. I focus on myself. I focus on exactly what is in front of me and ahead of me and what I can control. So I do certain things about like pick up your feet. I give myself little mental reminders to continue having good form and to utilize all the muscles that are available to you. So I give myself reminders about things like moving my arms, right? Your arms can help propel you forward. So I like, okay, move my arms, let my arms help me. Make sure I'm like utilizing my glutes, picking up my knees, right? Instead of that slow shuffle. The other thing I like to do is I like to pick out a person ahead of me that in my head is like, the rock star and they're like driving through the crowd and like going for home and strong and I use that person and I say I'm tacking myself onto the back end of that person and I'm going to let them pull me along, right? So I like to have this tunnel vision where it's just like I just got to focus on what's ahead of me and make sure that my body is operating as optimally as possible. And that's what I like to do in those really, really tough miles. There's certain other points where you can like draw on the spectator support. And I think the points where I personally like to do that is around like mile 25.5 or mile 26 mile 26, where you're close enough to the end that you can start to like use the energy and that anticipation to get you through, right? Because you're so close, it's 10 minutes or whatever it is. At that point, I think I'm okay to start to look outward. But in those later miles, like 21, 22, 23, 24, I really do that tunnel vision, narrow it down and say, I have to grind. I have 35, 40 minutes, whatever it is for you, 50 minutes. I have to get through this and I want to be as strong and as focused as possible. So I do the method of like, just tunnel down, focus on myself, focus on something ahead of me, use little instead of trying to break it down into miles, I use little landmarks in front of me, like just get to that tree, just get to the stop sign, just get to the next block, just get to that next turn. Because there are so many turns in this, that is one of those things that's really beneficial where you can just say, okay, I'm just going to get up to that turn and then I'm going to, whatever is, when I turn left, I'll face that, right? And so breaking it up into smaller pieces because the miles, the early miles, they fly by. It was like, oh, where did the first 10 miles go? I have no idea. Then those later miles, it's like, this feels like an hour. How am I still running? Like I'm in mile 23, it's taking an hour. How is this possible, right? The time warps itself. So, breaking it down into whatever is manageable to just get you through it, like breadcrumb your way.
Love it, love it. So much good stuff in that. And now, last but not least, global warming exists, and there might be some chances that this race temperature is not the ideal temperature in the 40s like we've seen in the recent years. There's always that one year. In case that happens this year, and I don't want to jinx it, but in case that does happen, how should runners adjust their pace? Because they don't want to go out the same, fast pace and then all of a sudden be slammed with that.
No, so I'm glad you asked this because I saw so many people in Berlin. We just saw this, it just happened, right? Horrible race day, 80-degree temperatures. Chicago has had horrible conditions before. Knock on wood, it doesn't happen this year. But You have to adjust from the very beginning. I know so many people that are like, they just went out and they let conditions get to them before they adjusted. This is incorrect because you are going to dig yourself into a deep well that then you have to try to claw your way out of or survive through. And instead, if you're conservative from the very beginning, do not cross that start line without adjusting your pace. Conditions dictate what your pace should be, right? And what is possible. If you have great conditions and ideal conditions and temperatures are great, then you run your exact target pace. If conditions are less than ideal in any way, then you have to adjust, and it should be very from the very jump, right? So mile one is slower. And the great thing about this, it's hard to do. People are resistant to it because I think a lot of times people convince themselves they're like, well, it won't affect me. It's like, I promise it affects everybody because we are not robots. We are human beings and the body works the same way, right? If it's hot, your body is going to be working extremely hard to cool itself down. You have a maximum core temperature that your body can sustain with active activity. It's across the board, right? You don't get to opt in or out. It's not a checkbox like, oh, I just decided I'm not going to be subject to that today. No. So if you adjust early on, you start out conservatively, you're still going to suffer, but that suffering should come very, very late, right? We don't want to suffer and hit the wall midway through. We don't want to suffer and have to walk or end up in a medical tent, right? Like there are serious health consequences that can happen from this. And so I really, really urge people to be conservative for a while. Go out slower than your target pace. And then if you're feeling good and if it somehow ends up being like, hey, it's not so bad, or the clouds come out, at mile 20, then you still have energy, cool, that's great. Go for broke in your last 10K, right? But if you go for broke out of the gate, you're setting yourself up for a potential failure and also again health concerns, like serious health concerns. So adjust early when you have the opportunity to find your way through that obstacle in those difficult circumstances. And again, nobody wants that, but we can't control it. So sometimes you have to just take what is given to you, right? It's not what you asked for, it's not what you trained for, it's not what you deserve, but it is what you have. And so you have to face it head on and with the reality of this is what I need to do to get through this in the best way unscathed.
Awesome. I love this. And, for anyone listening, obviously, ideal race conditions would be awesome. But if they don't happen, you have an excuse to sign up for the next race. So keep that in mind. You can make that A goal race into a B goal race and then, just kind of move on. But thank you, Kristyn, so much. I really appreciate all your input. And maybe you can let us know how people can find you if they like you as a person and want you to be their coach.
Yes. Well, I am online. I have socials. I have a website. But I will spell my first name because it's different. And if you search it the wrong name, then you won't find me. But it's Kristyn. And the last name is Smith. But I'm on Instagram at KRISRS. That's my handle. And then I have a website, which is coachchrisrs.com.
Perfect. And we will link that in our show notes, Kristyn. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.